Why debt is older than money itself. Right now, you owe someone something. It might be a number on a credit card statement. It might be a friend who covered your half of dinner last week. It might just be a favor you haven't returned yet. You live inside a web of debts so ordinary you barely notice them, and you probably assume this whole system started with money. First there was trading, then someone invented coins, and debt came later once people had something to borrow. That's the story most of us were taught without ever being told it directly. And it's wrong. Debt didn't come after money. Debt came first by thousands of years, and it existed before humans had coins, before they had writing, and in some places before they had anything you could honestly call an economy at all. So the question is simple. If debt requires trust, memory, and some way of keeping score, how did entire societies run on it before anyone had invented a single coin to settle up with? Let's start with the story you were probably told in school, because it's the story that has to fall apart first. The textbook version goes like this. Ancient people had a problem. You had chickens, I had grain, and if I wanted your chickens but you didn't want my grain, we were stuck. Money solved this. It was a neutral thing everyone agreed to want, so trade could finally work. It's a clean story. It's also one that anthropologists have never actually found evidence for. Not in one single society, anywhere, at any point in the historical or archaeological record. No culture has ever been documented running its economy on strangers walking up to each other and swapping goods on the spot. So if it wasn't barter, what was it? The answer is something much older and much stranger, and it has nothing to do with objects changing hands at all. It has to do with memory. In small hunter-gatherer bands, the earliest ones we have any evidence for, people didn't trade with each other in the way you're picturing. They gave things away. You caught more fish than you needed, so you handed some to your neighbor. Not as a sale. Not for an agreed price. You gave it because that's what you did, and because everyone in the group understood something unspoken but absolutely binding. Your neighbor now owed you. Not a fixed amount. Not a number written anywhere. Just a rough, living sense that the balance between you had shifted, and that it would shift back eventually in some form nobody needed to specify in advance. This is debt in its rawest form, and it didn't need money because it didn't need precision. It needed memory, and it needed a community small enough that everyone could keep the ledger in their heads. Who had helped who was still owed, who had let too many favors slide. In a group of 40 people, you don't need a bank. You need a good memory and a strong sense of shame, and early humans had both in abundance. But that system only works at a small scale, because the human brain can only track so many relationships with that kind of precision. Once societies grew larger, once cities and kingdoms started forming, that mental ledger broke. Too many people, too many transactions, too much to hold in memory alone. And this is where debt takes its next enormous leap, thousands of years before anyone minted a coin. In the river valleys of ancient Mesopotamia, in cities built around massive temple and palace complexes, something remarkable was happening. Grain, livestock, tools, and labor were all being tracked, owed, and repaid on a massive scale, and all of it was recorded on clay. Scribes pressed marks into wet tablets, keeping account of exactly how much grain a farmer owed the temple, how many sheep a household still had to deliver, how much labor a family owed the palace in exchange for land they worked. These tablets are some of the oldest written records human beings have ever produced. Writing itself, one of the most important inventions in our entire history, appears to have developed largely as a tool for tracking debt. Not poetry, not law, debt. Before humans wrote down a single story, they were writing down who owed what to whom. And here's the detail that should stop you in your tracks. Coins didn't exist yet. Not for another 2,000 years or more. An entire civilization was running a complex economy of debts, credits, taxes, and repayments using nothing but clay tablets and trust in institutions, centuries before the first coin was ever struck anywhere on Earth. Money, in the form you're picturing it, wasn't the foundation of the economy. It was a much later tool built on top of a debt system that was already old. But a system built entirely on debt has a dark side, and ancient societies ran straight into it. If you owe grain to the temple and a drought wipes out your harvest, the debt doesn't disappear. It just sits there, growing, and you have nothing to pay it with. So what happens next? In many ancient economies, the answer was brutal. You could pledge your own labor against the debt. You could pledge your children's labor. In the worst cases, a family that fell too far behind could be forced into debt bondage, working for a creditor with no clear end date, sometimes for years, sometimes for a lifetime. Debt wasn't just a financial arrangement. It was a mechanism that could quietly convert free people into something very close to property, one bad harvest at a time. And this created a serious problem for anyone running a kingdom, because a society doesn't function well when a large chunk of its population is trapped, indebted, and desperate. Desperate people don't farm well. They don't fight well in your army. They start to resent the people at the top, and eventually, resentment turns into unrest. So ancient rulers developed one of the strangest and most important financial tools in human history, the debt jubilee. Periodically, sometimes when a new king took the throne, a ruler would issue a decree wiping out certain categories of debt entirely. Farmers who owed grain to the temple were forgiven. People trapped in bondage over unpaid debts were released. The Code of Hammurabi, one of the earliest and most famous law codes in human history, includes provisions for exactly this kind of debt relief. This wasn't kindness for its own sake. It was maintenance. Rulers understood that a society drowning in unpayable debt eventually breaks, and the fix wasn't more money. It was periodically resetting the ledger back to something people could actually live with. And this pattern wasn't unique to Mesopotamia. In parts of medieval Europe, tally sticks were used to record debts between merchants. A piece of wood notched with cuts and split down the middle, one half kept by the debtor, one half kept by the creditor, so neither side could quietly alter the record. In parts of West Africa, cattle functioned as a living ledger, a debt measured not in coins but in animals everyone in a community could see and count. Across the Pacific, communities used enormous carved stone discs to represent debts too large to physically move, where ownership could change hands through nothing more than the whole village agreeing out loud that it had. None of these systems needed coins. What they needed was a shared, trusted way to remember an obligation. So where does money actually enter this story? Coins first appear around the 7th century BC in the Kingdom of Lydia, more than 2,000 years after debt systems were already running entire civilizations. And even then, coins weren't invented to solve everyday trade between neighbors. Coins solved a different, much more specific problem: paying soldiers. A king with an army needs a way to pay large numbers of men who are far from home, buying food from strangers in unfamiliar territory where nobody has any relationship or trust built up. You can't run an army on remembered favors. A coin carries its value with it. It doesn't require two people to know or trust each other. It was debt made portable and impersonal. Once coins existed, they spread quickly because they solved a problem trust-based systems never could: doing business with total strangers. But the older system of debt never went away. It just went underground, running quietly alongside the new metal currency for centuries. Coins didn't replace debt. They gave debt a new tool to work alongside. So here's the full picture. Long before coins, small groups ran on memory and trust. When groups grew too large for memory alone, writing itself emerged largely to track who owed what. When debt grew unpayable, it could quietly turn free people into something close to property, and rulers had to periodically erase the ledger just to hold their societies together. And only after all of that did coins arrive, not to fix trade between neighbors, but to let strangers do business without needing to trust each other at all. And now look at you. You tap a card and a debt is created and settled in the same instant, invisible and so normal you don't think about it at all. You've never had to remember who owes who in your village, because the entire system does that remembering for you now. Every balance you carry, every loan, every dollar in your pocket is a direct descendant of a clay tablet in a Mesopotamian temple, keeping score of a debt somebody owed thousands of years before anyone thought to melt down metal and call it money.